Hello and welcome back to Dicebreaker, where today we're doing something a little bit different from what we usually do. I'm joined by Liv.
Hello.
How are you doing, Liv?
I'm doing pretty good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. My name is Wheels.
Hi.
If this is your first time in the channel, thanks very much for dropping in. It's a brand new format for us. It might not be as new for you if you're watching this in the past, but hopefully we'll have some more of them. Because if you like something like this, if this sort of more off the cuff, a bit more freestyle way of doing content is interesting to you, then please do let us know in the comments. We'll do some more of it. But basically what we want to do today is talk about some specific RPG things, some specific D&D things, talk about our thoughts on them, and then also just sort of explain how we would improve on them. And we're starting off with something that is quite a contentious issue, I think, in RPGs in general, which is combat rules.
Yeah, contentious issue in RPGs in general, contentious issue in the office between us, honestly. So
these two people really like to talk about it.
Yeah.
But essentially, we talk about these things all the time, and we thought we should be filming this and like making this more of an official discussion so that we can get people's opinions in the comments, and then maybe like if you've got any questions for us, we can start answering those and all that kind of things.
We actually want to start combat in the comments.
Yeah. If you want to fight us, roll initiative. But I will say as well, not that we need to provide credentials, but like Liv and I have both been playing RPGs for a very, very long time. We're both pretty seasoned. Not to the extent where we think we know it all, but we definitely have enough of an idea of how things work that we've run into pitfalls that we're hopefully able to help you avoid. So, as we said, this is RPG combat sucks and how you can do it better. Mainly D&D, because obviously it is the Goliath RPG that everyone knows, that most people play.
It's the go-to-ish.
Yeah, it's the one that most people associate with RPGs. And I think one of the largest problems that D&D has is its combat system. Because not only is it quite clunky and a bit old and got quite a bit of baggage, it also is essentially the main part of the game. It's the thing that takes up the most of the rule book. It's the thing that most official modules will ending in. Like, you will usually have a boss fight. There will be combat encounters hard coded into like the scenarios that you run. So combat is like a very, very big deal in Dungeons and Dragons. It's most of your characters' builds are geared towards what kind of things you're going to be doing when you get into a fight with someone. So you're not just like a druid, which means you like trees. It also means that you can control roots and vines and all that kind of stuff. You can summon bears or turn into them or whatever it is. I haven't played a druid.
The whole subsection of bear combat that's in the druid class is it's a big pull.
But let's talk about why it's a problem first.
Okay.
Let's talk about the issues that we're addressing on the video before we start addressing them.
And I will say as well that I'm going into this because I like D&D combat.
You're a massive D&D fan, right? Like I'm quite vocal about the fact that I'm not a huge D&D combat fan. The camera just went out of focus for a second there, like it was trying to read me. But yeah, like I in general adore TTRPGs in all of their shapes and forms. Like I've had loads of lovely times playing D&D. I don't think it's like a bad game inherently. But one of my biggest problems with it, one of the reasons that I really get turned off by D&D is the combat and the way that it works. The minutia that it delves into sometimes, which I can find quite frustrating. So but I'm not alone in this, right? You also have your own problems with D&D combat.
Yeah, I have some issues that I would definitely improve on, and I think as well, a part of what's exciting about this for me is like learning how I could possibly improve things for you if I were to DM for you. This is interesting for me going forward. And I think it's important to make sure that you take into account what your players enjoy and how you can make it interesting for them. And the fact that if you're running the game, you can do combat in any way you like.
Yeah, but here's the thing. It's often spoken about especially with D&D, if you don't like a rule, just don't use it, right? And all that kind of thing. But at the same time, those rules are there for a reason. The rules are there because that is the intention of the designer, the intention of the game. So at some point you have to sit down with those rules and think about why they do and don't work, and what it is about them that you're avoiding. Because I feel like a lot of the time, I say this all the time, most people who play D&D aren't actually playing D&D. They're playing their sort of own perception of what the game is supposed to be played as, because you won't find many people who have actually sat down and read all 4 of the books that you are supposed to read before you start playing. But combat, as it stands, it's turn-based, which is one of the most important things about it. It's like a system wherein you have your initiative derived turn order. When you get your turn, you get to do 1 action, and then like a bonus action, and then that's essentially the bare bones of it.
Action, bonus action, movement. That's pretty much it.
And talking, there's little bits you can do.
Free actions.
Exactly, right. But essentially, that's what it boils down to. A lot of the rules then play with that. Like, you were talking before the video about sorcerers and the way that they can, turn that bonus action into a cantrip or whatever. Like, there's ways in which you can fiddle with the system.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing. You have to make sure you build your character in that way in order to fiddle with the system and maximize its potential, basically. Also, something that I will mention is that when I'm referencing D&D here, I am talking about 5th edition. There are like other examples that maybe you have from like 3.5 and stuff like that, but I'll mostly be talking about 5th edition here.
Which is, it's the modern iteration, is the one that most people are playing. So turn-based in general, just as a concept, like I have big problems with. I think a lot of people have big problems with. I think some of that stems from, before I knew I had ADHD, that maybe I was running into problems that were, part of that as well. But, especially with someone who's neurodivergent, I think you can find ways in which turn-based can be really helpful, but it can also be a real hindrance to their enjoyment. But speaking of like the sort of general perception of turn-based, like regardless of the ways in which it affects like people on an individual level, I think from like a systemic design point of view, turn-based games leads to quite sort of stale and quite slow gameplay because first of all, for the majority of your session, you've been walking around having these fun chats and like, I'm gonna do a cool climbing action and like we're swinging across rope bridges and we got into a fun intimidation off with this guard and whatever. And then as soon as combat kicks off, like the whole game stops. Everyone sit down, roll the dice. We've got an hour's worth of like working out mathematics for you to all sit through. And it's, it is, I think in general there's a big problem that RPGs have where, because all of our perceptions of how TTRPGs work have been based on the fact that most people have started with D&D, there's this idea that combat can't be done unless it has its own rule set within the game that you're playing. Which means that not only do you have to change the game that you're playing every now and again when something happens, especially in D&D case where, combat's a huge deal, like it's a big part of the game, right? So it's gonna happen a lot. You have to just like pull on the brakes, completely change how everything's working, and suddenly you've lost all the freeform, ability that you had before. But you also then run into the problem where, the fact that combat is essentially a different game that you're playing.
It's like it does. One of the problems I do have with it is that it actively discourages communication between players. Well, it depends, but like most of the time, it's like you have your initiative order, and you're like, what would my character do in this moment with the information that they have in front of them? It's like you don't have time to, because each turn is 6 seconds. So it's like, what do I feasibly have the time to do in 6 seconds? And does that include communicating with my team? Would that take up my entire turn? So like, it's like, if I'm playing this realistically, it's like I'm not going to have the time to, it's called metagaming a lot, when you like say, oh, hey, we're in this battle now, what do we want to do? It's like, if I'm playing the rules as written, like I shouldn't really be able to discuss that with my team in this turn. So in that way, it does kind of discourage communication, but like that's something that maybe can be fixed, which we'll move on to at some point.
So again, it's another example of the fact that the game sort of fundamentally changes when you enter into this, and that doesn't happen with anything else. Like we should point out, right? There's no like communication rules. There's no like courtship rules for when you want to date an NPC or whatever, right? It's like you are either doing combat or you're doing everything else. And because of the way that the game is structured, a lot of the time, and this is not just a D&D problem, there's a lot of RPGs that suffer from this, combat has like, 80% of the rules text given to itself.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the things are just sort of like, well, here's what you do in between the combats. And it's
Sure.
like, well, is that not as equally as important? Because like you look at all the things that you need to do to hit someone with a sword.
Yeah.
Right? You've got, first you get into combat, you roll your initiative, you wait until you get your turn, you decide on what combat action you're going to take, you then do a challenge roll to see whether or not you hit them, which then gets calculated against their armor class, which can be affected by its own rules. At that point, if you do get to hit them, then you do a separate damage roll, and then you get extra effects which you can apply based on your class. Whereas, like, if I go up to someone and say, I want to charm this person to, like, you know, with my persuasion and say, oh, why don't you let me in? It's literally just roll one die.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, I'm not saying that either one of those is better than the other, but it's clear where the effort has been put into when it comes to D&D as a game, I think.
Yeah.
Like the amount of attention to detail there is in the combat sections. Whereas most of the time, most people are just spending their time like having a fun jaunt and like going around. And one thing that I think turn-based is really, really damaging to, like you said with communication, right? It's the free-form nature of yes-anding and like, you know, the improvisational style of play that a lot of people have when it comes to RPGs that they don't really do as soon as they come to combat. Part of it is that metagaming thing, I think, where it's just like, well, how would you know to do, like, we're having this conversation out of character, but how would your in-character know? But also it's just, turn-based, it's almost like you have a spotlight on you for,
Absolutely. Yeah.
you know, here's your 10 minutes in the light, you get to do your cool thing, and then you just shut your brain off for a bit whilst everyone else does something.
Yeah, that is the thing. The shutting off, yes, that can be a problem. Like, for example, you mentioned like your ADHD. I also have ADHD, so it can be a problem where you know, you have to wait for your turn to come around, and it's like, cool, I'm going to plan what I'm going to do in my turn. It's going to be really cool. I'm going to utilize all of my bonus actions and blah blah blah. But then it's like, okay, I've gotten distracted by something. Wait, what was I planning to do? Oh, it's my turn now. Oh my god, okay. So that can be an issue. But then again, on like the antithesis of that, it can help other neurodivergent people to like, you know, take a moment to step away and like observe everything else that's going on and thinking, okay, now I have time to actually formulate a plan and not being put on the spot. So like, if you're not the kind of person who gets distracted and you're fully invested in what's going on, it can be really helpful. So that's an
Yeah, I think like the counter argument I would have to that is that then, whilst it's nice to, you know, in general, it's nice to be able to give people time, which I don't think is necessarily like beholden to the fact that you're in turn-based. Like you should be able to do that with people anyway. Yeah. Like in general, if you're a new GM watching this, like if people need time to sit down and think, like just give it to them.
Oh,
like, there's no like ticking clock outside of the game, right?
Yeah.
Even if you're in some kind of like bomb defusal situation, even if the clock is ticking down, it doesn't mean that you have to put a physical timer on the table and make people make their decisions quickly.
You can always pause.
You can always pause, right? That's the whole point, right? You're basically writing a TV show in real time, you know? So when it comes to sort of like the ways in which the characters interact with each other, I think you tend to find that outside of combat, I know I keep using D&D as an example, but I think D&D is like a really good example of how combat rules can really halt the game. Yeah. And we'll talk about some other games in a minute of like different ways in which they have taken their approach, which have either aided or maybe even not aided the way in which the two systems interact. But when you've got this turn-based system, it's like, okay, we are in combat mode now. Yeah. It means that anyone who isn't interested in the combat you're doing is like, okay, well, I'm in combat now, right? So like, even if you are that character, you are that player who is just like, I don't really care about combat systems. Like, I'm going to sit back and like let people do things. There is that, okay, well, it's your initiative window, so what are you going to do?
Yeah, there is a pressure to do something.
Yeah, you've got that social pressure from other players who are like, why aren't you doing any damage right now? All that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I think it comes down to efficiency, which stories aren't about being efficient, you know? And like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you have way more fun in games like this when you're not thinking about what is the maximum amount of damage or crowd control I can do with my abilities. I
think it does depend on the player, because I like know so many people who are just like, I have built, but this can also be like a criticism of it, I have built my character around how they fight And yeah, maybe you've built your character to maximize how much damage they put out, and roleplay comes second. But like, oftentimes it can be the opposite way around, and sometimes you'll just be kind of like, I have nothing to do during this section of combat. But like, I think it's important. What was my point?
ADHD. We were talking about like the most fun way to play isn't necessarily like adding up stats.
Yes, exactly. So yes, for some people it can be that damage output is a lot of fun. Like, for example, in a game where I was playing a paladin and my friend was playing a barbarian, it was basically us just like going against each other and being like, who's going to get the final blow, who is going to do the most damage, stuff like that. And for some people that can be a very fun aspect of D&D combat. But
well,
like,
it's, like miniatures games exist, right? Like like if you look at something like Warhammer, that is literally, it's just D&D combat, but instead of in some cases you are, like things like Frostgrave or whatever, like instead of just controlling like one person or like a small party of people, you've got like a big army. But essentially it's the same thing. You take turns, you do the most efficient damagey turn that you can do. You have your sort of like counteraction of other people's things, and then either the other player, or in this case the GM, will come back to you and do their own, right? But there is that aspect of with things that are based around efficiency in the way that D&D combat is, where it's like there are, in many cases, if you're in a fight, there are ways to do things that are the most efficient way to do things, right? Where it's like, I know that if I use my 1d4 dagger, it's not going to be as effective if I'm a warlock or whatever and I've got my Eldritch Blast. Like that's always the one that I think people run into, where it's like, it's my turn, Eldritch Blast, okay, onto you, where it's just like, I'm not making any decisions. I'm just like going through the motions that everyone expects, because otherwise I'm not going to be as cool or whatever. Yeah, no, there is the pressure of doing the one thing you're good at. Like if you were to kind of like think, I might try something a bit different, it may or may not work. A lot of the time there will be pushback from your team, which I in itself is metagaming, I suppose, because people should just be allowed to do what they want to do on the turn without any influence from other people. But it can be the case of you just being narrowed down to like one facet of a character, and that is a bit of a shame. Which I think is derived from the fact that, one of the major problems I have in RPG combat in general is that this idea of like health points and like statistical knowledge about how a fight is going. In no other like storytelling medium do you really have that, right? Like if you look at a video game, for example, when you're in combat, the story stops so that you can do combat, much like it does in D&D. But the implication of that is, video game combat's very fun, and it's got like, it's got its own really interesting decisions. There is usually like a really interesting balance between the different things that you can do. If you're talking about like another turn-based thing like XCOM or whatever, like there might be interesting narrative beats inside of that, where it's like, oh my god, this character's in real trouble, etc., which, you can see in RPGs as well. But those are never the plot, And I think with those, because 5e does feel like such a video game inspired RPG now, which is weird because it was D&D was precursor to video games, and then RPGs got inspired by D&D, and then D&D inspired video games and cyclical nature and whatever. But I do think the fact that we have this kind of dichotomy between the two experiences means that you kind of forget why you're playing the RPG, which is to tell an interesting story. So when you've got this you've got the social pressure to do the most like, either the most like interesting or the most efficient thing for the combat, because you've got to play your role. You are the tank, you are the healer, whatever. Like if you're not doing it, you're letting everyone else down. It's not necessarily like a spoken thing. Sometimes you're just like, oh, I don't want to ruin everyone else's time, or I don't want someone's character to die. That is a lot of pressure to have on everyone. If you do something and then the character ends up suffering because of it, like. Because you had a jokey move or whatever. Like there's going to be like a social pressure to not do that. But there's also that aspect of, I want to do this thing, but the rules don't really explicitly tell me how to do that. So usually, and again, especially in D&D, if you've got something that is a non-combat thing that you want to do, usually it's always going to be less effective than your combat options, because there's no real like move set for non-violent actions outside of the ones that you take when you're not in combat. So you're kind of having to like bridge the two worlds, and they don't really lock into each other very efficiently, in my opinion.
Sure.
So, like in general, all of this is to say, when you've got like this hyper-focused kind of, like, it's all about statistics. It's all about how much damage you can do on your turn. It's about like how much damage you can prohibit by doing interesting crowd control effects or like by healing characters or whatever. You've also got like this turn-based thing where you've only got this, you've literally just basically got one thing that you can do on your turn, and then you have to wait until it comes around. It means that things like multi-step planning can get hampered because if some other guy on your team has a different opinion to you of what the cool thing is to do, or, and this happens a lot, and I do this a lot, and I wish I didn't do it as much, where you just like have this cool idea in your head, but you don't want to tell anyone what it is, because you've got like the punchline of the final, it's like, but now I do this, and it's like, if you're playing Magic the Gathering, that's fine, right? Where it's like there's two people and you're doing a combo. But when you've got other people who are trying to do interesting things with you, you're kind of stepping on them and they're stepping on you.
It's kind of a race to see who can do it first.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just find the RPGs that stray away from, first of all, even having a combat rule set. Like RPGs that just say, combat works exactly the same like anything else you would do in the world. Because like in the real world it does, right? There is... if you get into a fight with someone, you don't enter a new phase of being. Like it's just, you know, the same ability that it takes you to, I don't know, out sprint someone is the same ability that it takes you to outfight someone or to out-talk someone or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But also RPGs that tend to stray away from the whole turn-based nature, I tend to find, and this is personal experience, people are way more collaborative.
Sure.
Because, you know, you've got, sorry, I'm cutting you off here because
No,
I'm going
go
off on
for
a
it.
tangent, but like I think, you know, one of the things that we spoke about before the video, and one of the reasons we wanted to do the video, because we were talking about the fact that like there's this issue in cooperative experiences with like quarterbacking, which is like a tabletop term where one person, stop me if this sounds familiar with the fact that I've just been speaking for the past 15 minutes, but one person takes all of the control and they don't let anyone talk, right? But, you know, there's like ways in which turn-based can help that stop because you physically can't do anything when it's not your turn.
Yeah, no, you have your set of turns to make, and if you can't do anything more than that, then sucks to be you.
Yeah.
You know, like.
But then at the same time, because you've got this turn and you've only got limited time per player to do actions, I feel like it almost makes it worse.
That's where we really differ.
Yeah, because it's like, Liv, why haven't you done the cool thing? Why are you focusing on having a fun time rather than killing the monster? You know, because like there's only so many turns in a combat encounter. Like there's only so many times that you can do an interesting thing. So if you've got like, if you're sticking very much to the rules, and bear in mind it's RPGs, like your DM can just be super lax about it and it doesn't matter. If you're sticking very much to the rules, then every time that you're doing something interesting in the story, you're doing something counterintuitive because you're doing something that doesn't help you fight the monster. So like, if we talked about Powered by the Apocalypse, for example, which is an example of a game system that doesn't necessarily have an explicit combat rule set. There are Powered by the Apocalypse games that do, but like the basis of that, like the core rule set doesn't have any core combat moves. It's just your moves, and that's the way Powered by the Apocalypse works. If you haven't played it before, you have like a set amount of rule set moves where it's like a little box where you roll your dice and you get the outcome based on your success and you add your own stats. There are ones that everyone shares and there's ones that you get that are class specific. Usually you don't find any of those where it's like, if you are in a fight, you can do this and get X damage, which is what most of your skills in D&D are, whereas with these it's like, you know, if you ever you like push yourself beyond breaking point, which sure, that could mean you're in a fight and you're like fighting through the pain and you're dripping with blood and blah, but it can also just mean, you know, if you put yourself in a really stressful situation, like maybe your character is terrible at public speaking and they push themselves to try and be like good on stage or whatever, that can still be the exact same thing.
Yeah.
I've forgotten where I'm going with this, Liv.
I love that we've both done that in this video. But yeah, no, I to jump in on what you were saying, I guess, especially with, I think with D&D combat, because you are in a world where you are a skilled fighter and that's why you're an adventuring party. I think how combat works is that it's trying to emulate the fact that you're a skilled fighter, things have gone into slow motion because you're so good at what you do that you know exactly what moves you're going to take, you know exactly like where you're going to go, what you're going to do. Like it's one of the best ways, I think, to emulate how you're just good at what you do. Like, oh, hey, I'm a bard, I'm going to like inspire you and I'm going to do a spell at the same time. Like it's like, it just shows what your party's about. It makes you more heroic, in my opinion. I don't know. But also, I think it also depends on like who you're DMing for as well. Like, for example, when we did a Powered by the Apocalypse RPG, which was Monster Hearts.
Yes.
I had Monster Hearts 2, thank you. Peace. I had done like a session the night before as like a test session, and in that test session, because I knew that the players there were really into combat-based stuff, we finished off that playthrough with a fight with like one of the NPCs, and that was like how it all wrapped up. But in our session the next day, I was like, this group of people doesn't enjoy combat as much as the people I was playing with last night. How about we do a more narrative thing? Like, I think a lot of the times it can be like used as a fallback, which is also really good for like for GMs, because like, you know that
gives you some breathing room,
exactly.
gives you space,
yeah. So it's not just about like you know, the player's good time, which, you know, it is. It's about everyone's good time. It's about just like the GM thinking like, okay, they're gonna fight this group of like muggers or something while I figure out what the next part of the story is going to be. Like, so the whole like wait 30 minutes and then we're going to get back to the story thing can also be a helpful thing for GMs. So I think that's...
Yeah, I think so. To build off of what you were just saying, so with the whole idea of, you know, if you are having like a session with players who don't like combat, then you can avoid combat encounters. If you're playing with people who do like combat, then you can not avoid combat encounters and go through that. I think the problem with that is, like, as a player who doesn't like combat in RPGs, like, speaking for that group of people, hi, that group of people, I'm your mouthpiece. I don't think I don't not like combat because I'm adverse to combat in general, like the idea of it or whatever. Like, I'm not like a game pacifist or something, you know? I will go and play whatever it is. Like, I'll go and play Assassin's Creed and murder an entire fort of people. That's not a problem for me. Like,
that's something we got to talk about.
I'll play warboard games and I'll play Warhammer and stuff like that. Like, I don't care. Like, I like combat-based games. I think the problem is, I just don't like the way in which a lot of RPGs handle the combat. Like, it's not the fact that, you know, I like playing pacifist characters and I only like having conversations. It's just I like the way in which the more social aspects of gameplay are structured, because the freeform nature of it allows me and the other players to really collaborate and to think of interesting solutions that don't need like specific rule examples to be able to be valid and stuff like that. Whereas with things like D&D combat, like, it is very much, you know, here are the limited amount of options you have. You have to do one of these. You can do it in like a cool way, but at the end of the day, it's like I remember having a combat encounter with one of my players, and every single time they did their basic attack, they would describe in real detail like how they do the attack. And they'd have this thing where they'd be like, you know, say they're like a legendary swordsman. It's like, I grab my blade out of the sheath and the light blinds as it shines off of the shimmering blade, and with a perfect swipe, I cut through the chest area of the goblin I'm attacking. It's like, okay, cool. You roll a you roll a 4. You know, like there's that idea of, you know, like, well, that didn't happen. So let's try and work that into narrative. But then also you've got, okay, that did happen. Like, that's a really cool thing you described. Doesn't change anything.
Yeah, no,
you're still just doing an attack with a D6 or whatever, right?
As somebody who has notoriously bad luck, dice rolls can be a really big problem. Yeah, no, that is something that I will actually agree with you on. I mean, not that I haven't agreed on with you for a lot of the stuff here, but like, yeah, having a really good idea in place and then just being told it does not work because you rolled a 1. In fact, you hurt yourself. That's what you get. Like, it can really take the wind out of your sails. So that's why I think In response to that, there are certain things that a GM can do. For example, like it's like, oh hey, you've been building up to this for a few rounds now. Roll it with advantage.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Or even, just like, there's basic tips for DMing where it's like, don't make the players look like idiots, you know? Unless that's the tone you all agreed to. Like, if you're all playing a slapstick campaign, that's fine.
Yeah.
But if your player character has like done this cool move and you can tell the player has put a lot of effort into like making it sound as amazing as possible, if it whiffs, don't make it because they tripped over their own pants that fell down and now their bare ass is sticking out.
And like, they fart.
Make it out of their control, like, the gleam of the blade gets in their own eye and it like slightly obscures their hit, or like, the person that they're trying to hit is really swift and they just manage to get outside. Maybe they get like a nick of blood on the cheek. There's dramatic ways you can describe that. But I think the reason I bring it up in this scenario is because it's actually the success that's really boring. Because it's like, you can fail things. You can always fail things in any part of an RPG, right?
Yeah.
But, well, in the ones where, there are pass and fail tests, you know what I mean? But if you succeed, no matter how cool the thing is that you described or how normal the thing is described, you always get the exact same outcome, which is rolling the same damage die, right? Like, unless the rules tell you you're allowed to do something where it's like, oh, now you have a special skill, which means that now you can do, because the game has decided for you that you're interesting now.
The game or the dice roll, like if you crit, I suppose that's the deviation from the norm. But I think that is designed for you to be like, it doesn't happen as often as it could. So like, it's like if you get that, that's a huge moment of excitement, and I think that's like a really nice way to kind of ingrain a little bit of difference, like a little bit of spice, which I really appreciate.
Well, so it's like, let's start talking about examples of how to fix things.
Yes, exactly.
Because we've got.
We've gone on long enough with what's wrong with.
But there's a lot. I think look, the fact that we've had this conversation for so long, like, is almost proof that there are definitely problems.
Yeah.
You might be on the side of the camp where it's like, I'm fine with all of those things and I have my own personal solutions for them. Or you might be more slanted towards my kind of side of the camp where it's like, no, like I run into this stuff all the time and it really frustrates me.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, then we have examples of like good ways in which you can fix that.
Yeah.
One of which being looking at other RPGs in the space and looking how that they do things. So 2 games by John Harper, has been on the channel before. If you've watched our AGON Let's Play, it's one of the games we're going to be talking about. You would have seen him GM for us. But also Blaze in the Dark is obviously like probably like the second biggest RPG in the space of people who really play it. Like, I think it's one of the most popular games.
Yeah, a lot of people know it.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's, I'm not just picking some random indie game out of my hat. Like, this is like a thing that a lot of people play. You'll probably be familiar with. Right. So Blaze in the Dark is a nice and obvious one. It just doesn't have combat rules. There's no specific, like, you are in combat now. There's no let's enter turn-based mode. There's no, like, moves that you can do inside of combat but you can't do outside because otherwise you'll trigger combat. It is just, here is your list of actions that you can do. Here's your list of skills. They can be used whatever you're doing, whether it's having a fist fight, whether it's having an epic gun battle on a blimp that's crashing into the floor, or whether it's just you, like, trying to pickpocket a guard or trying to, break a window without making any noise. Like, it doesn't matter what you're doing, the rules always work in the same way. Multiple reasons why this is good. First of all, less player headache for learning, right? It's, there's no extra, like, SAT test that you need to do every time. There's no stop, let's change the game into something else. There's no like things that you love doing that you are prohibited from doing because they're not in the window of gameplay that you want to do them in, But the other obvious thing is just the fact that when you step outside of that sort of turn-based, very, very, like, specific way of describing actions, like you said, 6 seconds is a turn, right?
Yep.
So it's like, it's not just, you do something, then this person does something, and then in the fiction, actually it's all happening together or whatever. It is literally, you do something for 6 seconds, and then you do something for 6 seconds, and you can move this exact amount of feet, and like all that kind of stuff, which is, I think, plagues D&D, this sort of hyper-specific like everything has an exact detail, and if you are 1 inch further, you know, unless your DM just says whatever, and if you are 1 inch further away than you need to be, then you can't cast your spell or whatever. Whereas when you make that looser, make it more abstract, don't have like, oh, only you can do something because it's this player's turn, then suddenly, whilst there's the problem of people who will take the limelight from other people and will try and quarterback, again, personal experience, I tend to find you get the reverse, where it's like, oh, we can all do stuff whenever we want. Okay, well, I don't really have a huge idea right now, so I'm just going to be sort of like, you know, say I'm like, I've got a gun or whatever, I'm just going to be shooting into whatever I can see. You guys work out the interesting scheme whilst I get some time to chill and think about what I'm doing.
Sure.
Whereas the other characters are like, okay, like we've got this cool complex plan that we want to do. I'm going to do this action, and then do you want to do that action? And then they'll be like, yeah, cool, and then I'll do this on top. And it's like you've got
that collaboration is
exactly
there.
right. It's not like in 4 turns I'll be right with you. Like just give me half an hour and I'll do the second step.
Yeah.
Or you know you have the thing where sometimes there is one player who's got their own cool idea that they want to do specifically as a person. And you can just go, instead of having that thing where you hide what you're up to and it's like, here comes the punchline, oh, it whiffed because, you know, after step 3, someone did something I wasn't expecting that ruined my plan. Or like, the monster's already dead or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, instead you've got this thing where, you know, that player can then be open about what they want to do and just be like, look, I want to do this, right? Because there's no specific barrier to what contains an action. Like an action doesn't have to be this exact amount of things or this exact amount of space moved or whatever. If it's even if it's something as simple as like I want to sprint all the way over to them so that I can get into close combat because we're miles away right now. I want to get right up close and personal. It could be okay. Well, that will take 4 turns for you to move your 30 meters each turn or whatever.
Yep.
Or it could be okay. Well, that's going to be quite complicated. So let's break it down. You know, let's say that. First, you need to duck into this bit of cover. Then you need to jump over this chasm. Then you need to do this thing. Here's your 3 separate actions. And then people can then start helping out, right? Because it's like, they know what the plan is. They know what you're up to. Then they can start being like, okay, well, look, once you've done your first action, I'll start laying down cover fire. And then, oh, you player, maybe you could cast that cool ability you've got, which sort of like brings up black smoke or whatever, so that they can have like a bit more visual cover and whatever. And it's less of, okay, well, I need you to do this, but your turn is already gone, so I have to wait 4 other people before you can do something.
Yeah.
It's just, hey, let's do cool things together,
in,
right? What's your thought on that, as someone who's used to turn-based stuff a lot more than me?
No, like, absolutely, that sounds like, I think it does depend on the player, which I've said before. Like, for example, if you like that familiarity of, like, I know exactly what I'm going to be able to do. This is me going back to, like, discussing combat itself. Yeah. But just, like, if you like that familiarity, then some people crave it, you know? So I think it does depend on the party and what they like to do. But, yeah, you can always shift things around as a DM. For example, you can always give your party like a non-violent option in place of combat. Like there can be, like I've been playing a lot of Descent Legends of the Dark recently, and like more often than not, and as far as I can see from playing it for the little bit I have, there's always a solution for you to avoid just whacking stuff, just hitting things like whacking, smack 'em. Like for example, my partner and I were playing a battle the other day where there was a witch. Spoilers for Descent, Legends of the Dark. Yeah, there was a witch. She had like a magical artifact that was gaining power. Instead of just like beating the heck out of the witch until she just was not able to do it anymore, you had the option to just like take the thing off of her and run. Just like run. And there was like a system where you could like pass it off to other players, and like you had to just like make sure that you kept it safe and stuff like that. So I think like that is a good way of like, you know, shifting things a little bit so that players don't have to just like do the same thing all the time. Other examples of like non-violent solutions that you can do are like negotiation. I think that's why I like playing bards quite a lot, because like they have like the spells, they have like the buffs they can give to other players and stuff, which are like really useful in like turn-based combat, for example, because you've got the spell as an action, you've got the bonus action inspiration, you've got whatever movement, blah, blah, blah. But like if you want to negotiate with someone, you're probably going to have to do like a persuasion roll or something. And that is something that bards are really good at. But anyone should be able to do that. You don't have to have like a high stat to do that as well, which I think falls into the kind of ballpark of like, oh, hey, you probably shouldn't try this because your stat is quite low in that. But I think you should be able to give everyone a chance to do that, whether or not they have like a high stat in it. For example, if they genuinely put across a really compelling argument and they like really that you really think, oh, that would have brought about like this monster or whatever, this villain, like give them advantage. Like I said before, let them add like a certain number to it, like to whatever's rolled, stuff like that. Don't like hold them back or whatever. There's also like the idea of like maybe you bring in reinforcements. If they're able to like, if there are people that they've met along the way who could possibly join them, then great, have them do that. There's also like all sorts of like magical spells and stuff that can be used really effectively and really creatively to like make sure that they have just different ways to get out of it, if they want to get out of it. Like I think on most of the time, like for me, if I do something that kind of skews the GM's plans a little bit, I find that way more satisfying than like hitting something really hard.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I think you can see that in the design of D&D over the years as well, right? Like, you had characters that did magic spells, like, and that was like a limited subsection for a while. And then, like, as you've gotten to 5e, it's almost like every single character class has their own type of magic, because they've realized that when it comes down to combat, the way you avoid boredom is by trying out a new spell every turn, like where it's like, oh, well, I'll try, you know, Hideous Laughter, or I'll try Acid Splash, or I'll try, like, whatever, where it's like, you know, instead of having to say, well, my most efficient thing I can do, if it comes down to raw damage, is to use this sword, so I will do that every single turn, because if I do anything else, then I'm probably not going to be as useful. Whereas, you know, if it's like, I need to stop this monster from attacking us for a bit, because they're doing loads of damage, like, at least with a big spell book, you can be like, I could do it like this, or it could do it like this, or it could do it like this. And then you've also got the thing of like, you know, what are they resistant to? So it's like, if they've got like a high charisma score, maybe I should try this instead, or whatever, right? And that's where you start to see some of the more interesting, like, tactical decisions come in, which there are RPGs that do that really well. One of the examples that we've got written down, for example, is Lancer, which is, for those not aware, it is, again, like, relatively popular, like, not a niche thing. It is a game in which you have basically not only two rule sets, i.e. outside of combat and inside of combat, but you've also kind of got two characters, because you've got your pilot and you've got your mech, right? Because it's like a sort of sci-fi mecha, I can't remember what they're called. What's the anime genre? Gundam, like Gundam style, whatever.
I was going to be like, Attack on Titan. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the one. Weaves in the chat, furious. But yeah, like, you've got that thing of, okay, well, look, if we're going to lean into this idea of like, here is non-combat and here is combat, then let's just go ham. Like, you know, I think that's why a lot of people really like 3.5e for D&D. Like, it's basically like a miniatures game. It was just super tactical. There were loads of options for customization, and you have that same thing in Lancer, where it's your character is just like your stats, and then you've got essentially, instead of like a specific subclass of action, you basically have tags, where it's like you roll a d20 and then like it's 50-50, but you can get a +2 if you can apply this tag for it. So that tag might be, for example, cool under pressure, which, you know, is really flexible. Like, you can use that on loads of different things, right? So it's like, oh, okay, cool. I'm going to use this to get my bonus. Whereas in combat, it's like everything is on a hex grid. You've got like area of effect attacks, where it's like they have certain shapes. Like, it's encouraged that you use a map and miniatures and stuff. You've got your mech is not just like a mech, it is like a customizable modular thing that, instead of building a character over a long period of time like you do with D&D and then having things that you don't care about fall by the wayside, instead, when you're near somewhere that you could feasibly, you know, change your mech up, you're in a sort of like post-scarcity future where you can just 3D print a new mech. So you're just like, okay, I've earned the license for this like company that provides certain weapons and things. I'm going to grab this frame from this company, grab this like laser cannon from this one, and equip it with this, you know, like ability, or I don't know what you'd call it, but essentially like attachments.
Yeah.
It's because I know that they're going to interact in really cool ways where, I can make those interesting decisions on a turn-by-turn basis, which you would make if you were playing a mech turn-based game like BattleTech or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So I think there are ways in which you can just sort of go, right, well, screw it. Like, if we're going to make a combat system, we might as well make a proper combat system.
Yeah.
But then again, that makes it less accessible for people because it's a very heavy thing that everyone needs to learn the rules to.
Yes.
Everyone needs to learn loads of different actions for, and it's just there are definitely loads of different ways of approaching it, and it's going to be different for everyone what they like.
Yeah.
But I just tend to find that I much prefer games where they just don't worry too much about the fact that you're in a fight, because it shouldn't be any different from anything else you're doing.
This is true. I think also a helpful thing can be in D&D where because along the way you're going to pick up a lot of things, giving your characters specific weapons or like items that might help them do something different in combat and change things up can also be really helpful. So like, not giving any spoilers for anything in particular, but like there's a popular D&D show where there was like a really like difficult fight that was avoided by somebody using like an item that they had gotten like probably in the first few episodes of the show, and that was used to effectively like wipe somebody's memory and avoid a fight altogether and avoid giving up a really high price. Of course, that did involve a roll going really well, otherwise it wouldn't have worked. But I think that kind of chance is really exciting as well.
Yeah.
It can be the worst, but it can also be really exciting.
And that's feasibly something that you could do inside of the combat structure as well. Like it doesn't. I think a lot of the time, it's really funny to me when people are like, "Oh yeah, I hate doing combat in D&D," and they're just like, "Just avoid it." Then it's like, well, yeah, but that's half the game. It's like, I might as well just not play D&D. But also, there's something to be said about just like, sometimes if people are desperate to play D&D, if you really love D&D and you just can't get on board with the combat, like there are probably ways in which you can just tweak with things, and it's going to involve some homebrewing, it's going to involve some like, whether that's things that have been made by other people or if that's just like ways in which that you change it yourself.
Which you shouldn't be afraid to do, by the way.
Yeah, no, not at all. Like the whole point of RPGs is you can do anything, right? So like the rules are important and they're there to like make sure that everyone's having a fun and balanced time. But also, if they are getting in the way, you can just get rid of them. You can just find a different rule set to play. Like, if D&D doesn't gel with you, try something else. Like if D&D is great for you, but there's one aspect you don't like, then change it. And I think like looking at other RPGs and how they handle combat is a really good way of working out what it is about the thing that you don't like. So for example, like we talked about turn-based systems. I hate waiting for turns, right? First of all, it makes me bored, like, which is just, it's just a fact of life. If you're waiting around and nothing is involving you, then you are just going to get bored. We've talked about the fact that, the whole sort of like metagaming thing of like, well, how did they know that? And all that kind of stuff can get in the way of you really collaborating and things like that. But one solution that I've seen in another game, which is by the name of Burn Bright, which is spelt with 2 Y's. Burn.
No, 1 Y, right?
1 Y.
Yeah?
Yeah, something like that. Like burn and then BRYTE, which is basically Roll20's official role-playing game that they've got like, you can buy the whole module set and all that kind of stuff. Not a big fan of Roll20, but I thought the game was kind of cool. But the way that they do combat is they basically have, everyone takes turns having actions. But if you've got something really important you want to do and you're like, oh, guys, I'm the only one who can do this, like I've got this really cool idea, you can basically say, I'm going to push my luck. Because everyone gets one action for free at the standard difficulty. But if you want to do something else on top of that before the next person plays, you then have to do a more difficult roll and a more difficult roll. And it can feasibly keep going forever, but eventually the odds will become impossible, right? So it is that thing of like, that question of how can I have the most interesting and efficient turn, almost gamified, where it's like, okay, look, the more that you push yourself in a short window of time, the more difficult things get, right? So it's like, it makes, narrative sense for you to be struggling the more that you go on. But also it means that, if you've been waiting for ages for a turn, you don't have to go, I hit him with a sword and then wait. You can be like, okay, well, right, I wanna lay down some fire on this guy. Like I want to get my damage out, but then I'm also going to push my luck a bit so that I can get into a better position. And then I also want to maybe try and like wrestle control of this like gun encampment or something, so that on the next turn, when I've recuperated myself, I'm ready to really do some damage or whatever, right? It's like you can have your cake and eat it too a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like you can do the thing that everyone's asking you to do, like, I'll use
Blast.
my Eldritch Blast,
Yeah.
okay, fine. But I also get to do this as well, because
Yeah.
let me do something cool as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is like always the idea of like you can allow somebody to like take the spotlight if they've got a really cool plan, and you know you have to convey certain things to people. You can convey stuff in a turn as well. Like there is the idea of like holding your turn for other people. So like you can just say like, hey, if this particular trigger happens, then I'm going to do this. But until then, I'm not doing anything.
Yeah.
And then that's how you can like progress turns even faster and get to the thing you need to do, or the other player has in mind. I think that kind of gets forgotten a lot, that you can just take a step back and that kind of thing. Or you can just do something like, I take the dodge action, which means that you can just like give somebody disadvantage to hit you on the next turn. There are lots of like, you know, really swift ways of like getting through your turn and being like, okay, my friend has something exciting they want to do. Let's go for it.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of going like, I'm just going to put this character on Overwatch in XCOM or something, right? Where it's just like, I'm going to do something that is always useful, but I don't have to think about too much.
Yeah.
Another game that I'll bring up, which has a really, really good example of how to tackle things like this, which is another John Harper game, as I said. Like we've got two from him, but Sean Nittner as well, I think, is the co-designer on this one, AGON. And AGON is like a Greek myth, kind of like classical storytelling kind of thing, like think Odysseus and the Argonauts and all that kind of stuff. So like you have encounters, and they can be combat, but they can be, you know, it could be like a battle of words, it could be like a sort of willpower thing, like can you make it up this mountain if like there's smoke from a volcano and all that, you know, maybe it's just like a battle of like trying to get yourself through things. Like it's not always fighting. But, you know, fighting is still the way that this works. And the really, really cool thing that I like is that essentially instead of saying, here's what I want to do, and then I roll a die, and then I see what happens, and then somebody else says what they want to do, and then they roll a die and see what happens, which not only is like way longer, way more drawn out, and way less like conducive environment for people to be able to like collaborate on things they're doing, it also means that we run into that problem we talked about before, where it's like I talk about the cool action that I'm going to do, and then I roll a one and I accidentally hit myself in the face with a sword, and it's just like, well, that sucks. So the way that AGON works is, and this is like true of other RPGs as well, I don't think they invented it, it's just like a cool thing that is in like a very widely accessible RPG from an RPG designer that a lot of people know, is you basically all roll your dice all at the same time. And you all know what you're doing as a vague idea, but nobody knows the actual action they're doing. So it's like, right, we're in this environment, right? So we get that die. And you're basically assembling like a pool, right? I'm gonna roll the die for like my name, because that's like the, you know, the fame I have. And then I get to roll something else as well. And you've got your little abilities where it's like, oh, I'm gonna up this die to this, or whatever, like push yourself for stress, all that kind of thing. But then everyone rolls, and they collect their best result, and then you just look at everyone's results, and you go, okay, right, we needed to get a 10, and that's each. I got a 4, Sam over here got a 10, and you got a 12 live, okay? I failed, right? So I know that what I'm doing is not gonna, so I, instead of having this pressure to always be cool and then it doesn't happen, instead I can be like, right, I know this is a moment where my character doesn't do something well, so instead, I'll be like, okay, right, so what would be interesting? Oh, maybe like our characters have been fighting, and I'm so pent up about that, like, you know, there was an opportunity for me to help you, but instead, like, I was quite petty, which then led me to put myself in danger.
That's cool.
And then suddenly, like, I'm taken out of action or whatever. We then move on to the next person with a higher roll. And now they succeeded, but just, right? So maybe let's say that we're fighting a monster, and like they go for a big blow and they manage to jab their spear into their leg. But as it happens, the spear breaks in half and they're broken back, and they're like, oh crap, but they've managed to get the person into like the monster, into like a sort of weaker position. And then, you know, say there's somebody else before you, and they're like, I know that I'm second last. I'm gonna set Liv up because Liv's got the killing blow. So it's like, I'm gonna jump onto the monster's back and like hold them by the horns like that and distract them, so that Liv, the person who rolled the biggest die roll, can then say, cool, I know I've got the killing blow, so I'm going to run up and I'm going to like do this epic action where I like spear through the heart, and then everyone feels like they're doing something that's important. Either it's because they helped, or it's because they're doing something that's interesting. And it's like, instead of just that, we're all telling our own little boring stories, it's like, let's get everyone together at the same time in a way that is so much more difficult to get around to when you're doing turn-based. It's not impossible at all. It's just disencouraged, I think. And like things like that are a really good example of how you can just be way more collaborative and way more interesting in the narrative that you're telling during a fight. Because like, look at any other like medium, like the story doesn't stop when you have a fight, you know, like it's, you know, look at like your favorite Marvel film or whatever, like the fight is just set dressing to the, you know, the apex of the like story arc or whatever. Like it's, you know, those things are supposed to be conducive environments to you telling cool things that happen. Like I shouldn't feel pressure to always be effective, you know, like I should be able to go, well, actually, like my character's really feeling crap at the moment. Like I don't want them to be effective. Like I think it's more interesting if they're like missing hits all the time and stuff like that. And like you can just do that. Like there's no pressure to have to fight something effectively. And it's
Yeah. No, I guess it can be like if you roll ineffectively during like D&D combat, you give like a bit of like flavor to it, and then it's kind of pushed aside. But like,
effectively nothing happens.
Yeah, exactly. But in that circumstance, it's like, oh, it's actually a part of the narrative. That's pretty cool. I would like to say though that it's very far-fetched that I would roll well, but I like the example. Thank you. But yeah, I think it's also like important as well in terms of like dice rolls and stuff. Because like if you roll really poorly, and then that contributes to like putting another character in danger, oh no, that's really bad. But also, if you're a DM, don't just try and kill them.
Yeah, no, that's something we should definitely highlight. Yeah.
Like I know a lot of DMs. Like I mean, for example, my partner, she's. I was talking about how like I've been playing a D&D campaign for like 2 years now, and like all of our characters are like really bonded, and like our character arcs are like really coming into fruition and whatever. But she was just like, wow, I've played 4 different characters in the last 2 years because like they keep getting killed because our DM's really rough on us. Yeah. Which like I think
if that's what you're after, that's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. It can be a little bit frustrating to people. I think like you should know what you're getting into with combat. You should give people as much of an opportunity as possible to kind of like pull things back if they're getting a little bit out of control. Like just make sure that people aren't having a bad time. Like, yeah, I know it's like a lot of people are like, oh, you're just going easy on your players and stuff. It's like, yeah, because it's supposed to be fun. But yeah, like it's definitely something to keep in mind. Just don't be a meanie.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of information to unpack there. Like, there's a lot of things that we've spoken about. There's a lot of ways in which, you know, you as players and GMs have the power to change things. Yeah. Whether that is literally just picking up a new system or it's just tweaking the one that you're already playing. None of these things are specific to D&D. There's loads of RPGs that, especially just because of the amount of influence that D&D has, like loads of RPGs view combat in the exact same way, I think, which means that you can fall into similar problems with them. So think long and hard about combat. Think about the things we said. Look at the examples that we've given. We'll have links in the description to the games that we mentioned that aren't D&D. And more importantly, if you enjoyed this, thank you very much for watching all of this discussion with us. As I said, this is way looser. Like, this isn't scripted. We're just sort of chatting. We've got like some bullet points down, but that's basically it. That's why we've got the laptops out. But if you enjoyed this, like, please do let us know. Is there a question about RPGs that you would like us to discuss? Like, is there a certain bit of advice you want? You know, we were talking about things like how to make compelling characters and, you know, how to not get bored of your characters.
Yeah, that's definitely one that, like, I think it would be a lot to discuss. So
yeah, like,
if you're interested, let us know.
How to make an interesting counter, like all that kind of stuff. Things that I think a lot of time you'll see like a guide, but you won't get that sort of like behind the scenes discussions of like, well, look, here's why we're talking about this stuff. Like, here's why it's interesting. You know, here's where mine and Liv's opinions differ. Like all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that, please do let us know in the comments. Give the video a like. Give us a subscribe. Thank you very much for watching Dicebreaker. If you want to see more from us, you'll have videos popping up on the screen right now. You'll also have them on the side. You can just click on our channel, and that's all there. We do all kinds of stuff on tabletop, but we are really ramping up our RPG coverage at the moment. So if that is your kind of thing, then please do stick around. But also, you can find a ridiculous amount of stuff on Dicebreaker.com, where both me and Liv have contributed, but mainly it is Matt Jarvis, Alex Meehan, and Chase Carter, with all of our fantastic freelancers as well, just providing fantastic articles, where it's guides or reviews or news or what have you. There's loads of stuff on there. And if you want to support the channel even further, we also have a membership program as well. Just hit the join button below to get more information on that. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Wheels, this has been Liv.
Hi.
We'll see you on the next video, but until then, have a lovely day. Goodbye!
Bye.